Smart aesthetic, branding, marketing, entrepreneurship.
Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast, part 2 of the presentation that I gave at FitBoss Blueprint FitBoss Weekend to all of the fitness professionals in the space, sharing with them about branding and how to make an impactful brand along to the visual theme of the Roman Empire and Roman gladiators. What you will see from this presentation on YouTube are the corresponding slides to the presentation. But my goal in recapping this in the podcast is that maybe you take away a little something, maybe you learn, maybe you've got some new verbiage to use with your clients or some considerations to make for your company. So by all means, as a podcast, it's just as good. And we are now on to part 2, which is solidifying your brand visuals. So definitely if you're a visual learner, maybe head over to the YouTube version. But we're going to get into all of this. If you have not yet listened to Defining Your Brand Presence episode, the first part of this series, part 1, start there. And if you've already got that one under your belt, you're like, yep, give me more. I'm ready. Let's dive into the part 2. So part 2 of building your bragworthy brand empire is really solidifying your brand visuals. We talked about laying the foundation. We talked about building the brand to start. And the first thing I always have to tell everyone, because we need the reminder, is that your brand is actually not your logo. It's not. Your brand is actually a combination of so many things, both visual and not visual, but your language, your marketing style, your message, your iconography, your font system, your merch, your apparel, your teaching style, your photography, your reputation, your organization. There are so many things that go into making a brand, but for the purpose of this episode specifically, we're going to actually zero in on the logo. The way that I always explain it to clients is that the logo is an ingredient in your brand. So when we're building your brand, what we're working on is actually stocking your kitchen full of ingredients. The logo is one of those ingredients. It's an important ingredient, don't get me wrong, but we want to make sure that we have these other supporting ingredients that help to carry out the brand mission, vision, values in your pantry, so to speak, so that you can create consistency. The analogy here is if you want your brand to taste like Italian cuisine, then you got to stock your kitchen with tomatoes and basil and garlic and all the flavors that make up Italian cuisine. If the client or yourself says that you don't want it to taste Italian and you want it to taste Chinese, then we've got the wrong ingredients. So what we need to do is make sure that we always have a good variety and good range, but concentration of ingredients that fit what it is that you're trying to cook. Again, bring it back to branding. We need colors, fonts, photography, logos, icons, patterns that have a consistent style so that when you go to cook something like a flyer, like an email, like a presentation, that you know that it's going to come out tasting consistent to your brand, consistent to your social media, consistent to your website, consistent to your audience. So the way that we do that on behalf of our clients is through 2 different services. We have our full service brand design offering, which is the whole enchilada into a multi-page brand guide that tells you exactly how to use the brand. So imagine you're getting your kitchen stocked with ingredients and you're getting the recipe book for how everything is supposed to be made. Versus the mini brand design offering, which is more of a, hey, just fill my kitchen with ingredients, right? More of like your Amazon shopper, where it's like, okay, here's your 9 things that you asked for, and we're going to put it in your kitchen for you, but we're not necessarily going to tell you how to cook it. So that's really the difference. But the idea at the end of the mini brand design offering is that you get this 1-pager cheat sheet that tells you what ingredients are actually in the kitchen. So we've got your color codes, we have your font names, we have your styles, your logos, maybe some supporting elements on that 1-pager. And that's a really useful guide to help you build what it is that you're trying to make with your brand, right? The other thing that's really important that does not get talked about enough when it comes to logos is the impact of color. So there's a statistic that reads that 77% of consumers will remember a logo's color more than the logo itself. So as much as we want to really just harp on showing black and white logos, which I don't recommend anymore, we need to make sure that we really have a brand color that becomes synonymous with the service, the product, the experience of what it is that you provide. So if we think about some of those iconic colors, right? When I mentioned green to you, there's a brand that uses a very specific color green that sells coffee. That would be Starbucks, right? There's a brand where you can shop that's a department store that uses a very specific color red, Target. A social media app that uses a very specific tone of blue, Facebook. Even a champagne brand that has such a signature color that it is like always on all of their packaging and it is their signature thing, no matter where you go for an event of this company, if it has this specific color, egg yolk yellow is what they call it, Veuve Clicquot. So again, the color is going to have that impact regardless of the logo necessarily, because the logos will change over time, but more often than not, the colors stay the same. And that's really important for cementing a brand legacy. Colors also carry their own color psychology. So I'm going to take you back to art school here for a minute. As we look around the color wheel, there are different qualities that we associate with different color tones. There is a reason that most of the major banks use the color blue. Blue is a very trustworthy, very professional color because it's very calm. And the things that we think about being calm, we tend to trust. So it also gives the illusion of being infinite. So being very large, because the biggest things that we know are the sky and the ocean, and those are blue. So it's not surprising that blue becomes a color that is associated with professionalism and with trust. Think of your like navy blue suit, right? Like classic finance blue suit. The next kind of colors as we round around the color wheel here are into the greens. Greens are very much associated with health brands, with consumer products, because it gives you that feeling of tranquility and of healthy, right? Something that's green and growing is something that we would want to be around because it feels good for us, like plants, right? So something that's green is going to be way more attractive than something that's brown. As you keep going in the warmer color edge of this spectrum, we have into the yellows, the orange, the red, which are more energy, courage, creativity, urgency. It's no surprise that my branding is yellow, right? It is bold, it is colorful, it is warm, it is bright, and it's pretty loud. And that's on purpose. Right? Creativity being more towards the orange, red. Red is passion, usually, is what we associate with red. And the creativity, like in between that yellow and red, you get orange, tends to kind of be that spark of a creative idea, right? Warmth, like a fire in a fireplace or the sun. There's going to be that life force energy coming with your oranges and into the reds. As you get into pinks, purples, and kind of more of the indigo colors, they tend to skew a little bit more towards compassion, playfulness, wisdom, royalty, kind of more of a prestigious color, you could say. But they give more of the empathetic end of the spectrum. So the pinks and purples are really going to give you that softer, sometimes associated more feminine, nurturing color tones. And also because those are like colors that we see like bodily functions, right? Like if you have a bruise, like it's purple. Like there's something to that of it feeling like it's natural, but not in a natural color the way that greens and blues are. Although they share a lot of the same color qualities. The pinks, purples as a brand color, I think can do a lot to carry that a little bit more playful, whimsical, even more like feminine, nurturing tones to the brand. When you're picking colors for your brand, my suggestions are always that you stick to one main brand color for 60% of your material. Then you need another 20% for a supporting brand color that brings contrast, and usually 10% for tints and shades of those colors, and another 10% for an accent color that brings a pop. So 60, 20, 10, 10, 60% main brand color, 20% supporting color, 10% for tints and shades. So you can have multiple. So 2 to 3 tints and shades, which are the lighter and darker versions of those colors. And then lastly, a 10% for an accent color that's maybe opposite the color wheel, right? That's going to give you high contrast. When we think about color selection, you also can create energy based on colors' proximity to each other on the color wheel. So colors that are across from each other on the color wheel create a lot of contrast and a lot of energy because they are opposing, right? They're fighting for your attention. Think about like blue and orange, purple and yellow. Think about green and red versus colors that are next to each other, are complementary on the color wheel, have less contrast, therefore less energy. They're more calm, more subdued, more chill. Examples of those would be like the color palette for Chase Bank, all shades of blue, very low contrast, very much less energy. Even though CNN has a bright red brand color, the rest of their colors are not really high contrast. You're not getting a ton of other colors. It's red, which is carrying that brand color adjective of urgency, right? But there's not a ton of other colors to then confuse you and throw you into a tizzy. It's pretty much just red, black, white. Same National Geographic, signature yellow, and then they have some blacks, but there's not a ton of other colors competing for your attention and a National Geographic brand presence, right? They're really letting the photography carry a lot of the weight there. For example, on the high contrast side, you're going to have way more energy because there's going to be more conflict between those colors. Those colors are competing for your attention. So think about sports teams, for example, like the Lakers, classic purple, yellow color combo. Even like soft drinks or fast food have a lot of high contrast in their color palette. So for example, like 7-Up, the drink, even though it's a citrus beverage, they have green with red, and they didn't go yellow, they didn't go orange, but it's like green and red. That gives you that nice high contrast for a lot of energy, a lot of effervescence. With all of these color notes in mind, we actually can embark on designing the logo. And there are some rules for me that I've adopted and that I feel like have just stuck over the years that make for good logos. And the logo foundations should be these 6 things. And whenever we have a client that comes to us that has an existing logo, I'm always going to measure it against these attributes. First, is it recognizable? Are the icons or letter forms unique enough, which is number 2, unique, to create a connection to the audience, but also be something that you could see and start to connect the dots between what it is and what it is that it's solving, or what the service that's being provided. Is it memorable? Not only with color, remember we just talked about the influence of color, but in composition. Is the composition of the elements together memorable enough to stick in someone's brain? Is it scalable? Does it work in lots of different use cases, all the way down from a pen up to a billboard? Is it relevant to the industry? And is it timeless? I'm always trying to design branding that's going to last a minimum 10 to 15 years. And the way that we do that is actually by referencing back in art history and referencing back in culture. So a lot of the really famous iconic logo designs don't really have a ton to do with the brand themselves. So you think about Apple, for example, the actual Apple logo, when someone's like, oh my gosh, I love the Apple logo, it's usually that they love Apple, the brand, and not necessarily the logo, because without context, it looks like a super streamlined, like Bauhaus, a fruit stand. Like without the context, we don't really know that it's Apple without slapping it on a laptop or an iPhone. Same with like the Starbucks logo as a mermaid, like fine artwork, but until you start to associate it with coffee, you're not necessarily going to see that as a logo and know that that's what it stands for. But other logos throughout history that have really pulled from art history would be, for example, like the Quicksilver logo designed in 1973 by Alan Green and John Law, being inspired by the Great Wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai, which is an 1829 woodblock print. And if you see the two side by side, it's pretty satisfying. Another example would be the Versace logo designed by Gianni Versace in 1993, being very influenced by Medusa, and not this specific Medusa, like a Bernini 1640 Medusa, but the idea and the iconography around a Medusa, right? So as we continue moving on, when you're thinking about your logos, you want to find ways to connect it to your audience, connect it to your industry, but maybe also pull from something from the past that can become then the symbol or the icon of your brand moving forward. The way that we approach this with our clients is really doing a deep dive on the values and then cross-referencing those with my own knowledge of art history and our own research. There's actually a training for you on my website called Kiss My History, which is basically like an art history 101 course that will help you map out the cultural and historical things that influenced design and art from the Industrial Revolution onward. It's not super in depth, but it'll give you like a good glossary terms to use, and will also help you in your search terms on Pinterest, with Midjourney, with just creating more context and visual interest in the brands that you're designing or the company that you'd like to have. So making sure that you have some of that influence coming through the art historical context and matching it to how the audience is going to interact with that brand. So for example, with FitBoss Blueprint, Ruben had expressed to me early on that like, I want the kind of brand mark that could be on a piece of clothing, like a Lululemon, like a Nike swoosh, like a, where it wasn't, you didn't have to have the whole word written out, but you had a symbol that could then stand for the business that when you saw it, if you know, that kind of feeling. So what we did for FitBoss Blueprint branding and what we do for all of our clients is create multiple variations of the logo. So if you are working with a designer or if you're a designer yourself, making sure that you have scalability options from a main logo to a word mark to a submark for different use cases is going to be huge in the versatility of that brand, right? Because now brands are much more than just you get your sign made over your door and you print it at the top of your invoice, as we all know, but it's how you show up on social media, how you show up in person, what your merch looks like, what your packaging looks like, and how the brand gets represented in all of those places. So a lot of the examples, again, if you're watching on YouTube, are coming from the FitBoss presentation, FitBoss Blueprint branding presentation. And we cannot end a conversation about branding without talking about fonts. So fonts are huge for communicating some of those like values and attributes and adjectives that you have for the company. Whereas the logo may not be used in every use case. For most things, print design, digital, merch, social, you're going to be leaning on fonts to spread the message of what it is you're trying to say. So consider how fonts create different attitudes and emotions that can either amp up or play down your brand values. Brand typography for us is pretty much broken into 4 types of fonts that are used throughout your brand. Your heading 1, heading 2, body, and accent. So your H1 font, heading 1, is going to have the most detail and probably be the most recognizable as being synonymous with your brand. So having something with a little bit of personality, a little bit of funk to it, a little bit of visual interest. This is not the font that you're going to use to write sentences and sentences and sentences of text. This is for a headline only. So maybe one word, anywhere up to like maybe a 5-word phrase will be in your H1. Your H2 is going to be something much cleaner. So your H2 is going to create contrast from that H1 font and give you variety in your font suite. So this is something that will be the subtext or the headline, subheadline underneath the main headline that is going to give someone the like browsability of your message. So this needs to be clean because someone who's skimming what it is that you're offering on your brand, right, is probably going to spend the most time reading an H2 headline. Your body font, clean, crisp, make it easy for people. Just don't go for anything crazy. Like it's going to be so small comparative to the others that you really want something that's going to be a good user experience. You can go sans serif if you're a little bit more to the modern side. You can go serif if you're feeling a little more traditional, but pretty much don't stray from either of those. Like don't ever use a script font as your body font. Don't ever use a slab font or anything that's going to have too many details or frillies or crazy characters as your body font. You're just going to make it impossible for your audience to know what they're looking for. Lastly, accent fonts. So accent fonts are a nice way, again, to add personality, to add contrast, but really these should only be a few words or maybe call to actions, maybe a button in your accent font. So if you start overusing this accent font, again, you make it really complicated for your audience to figure out what the heck they're supposed to read. I love to create an accent font or include an accent font that has more of like a personal quality to it. So maybe a script or a handwriting font, just to create variety so that you're not always leaning on more of those like digital feeling fonts, but something that has some visual interest. And I think accent fonts are also a really nice way to play with variety. I don't think you need to just stick with one accent font. Based on the campaign, based on what it is that you're offering, you can swap those out. You can swap them out based on style, on season. Like I think there's a lot of versatility to be had in that one. I'd be very cognizant and very aware of how often you switch your fonts. Instead, only maybe tinker with changing 1 or 2 every now and then, right? Also, script fonts have this quality about them that make them feel very dated very fast. So when you're considering script fonts, it's really nice to be like unique and personal, but the downside of that is it can be really difficult and chaotic to see what the message is. And I think sometimes designers get really lost in that, right? It still needs to just be an accent. It needs to be like the garnish on the top of your plate. It needs to be the little that goes on the top of your cocktail, right? But you cannot make an entire drink out of like dried oranges, for example. Your serif and your sans serif fonts, pros and cons to both. It's really just comes down to personal preference. It comes down to the brand. But your serif is going to be more serious, a little bit more respectable. Maybe it comes off a little stuffy or old school. This is great for headings and body. But the sans serif fonts are going to be a pretty classic go-to, right? Clean, modern. Downside, they can be kind of boring or impersonal. But really, generally, a great sans serif font is going to be pretty ubiquitous, pretty easy to use. The last bit of this, when it comes to stocking all these ingredients in our hypothetical brand kitchen, are kind of extras. I wouldn't say that they're totally necessary for every single brand, but brand patterns and brand icons can also do a lot to convey the message of your branding. So on the pattern side, you can use them on digital to create depth and interest with web and email. For print, it really helps to create like seamless repetition for things like merch or installments or advertisements. And on social, it creates visual consistency without having to always lean on the logo. So having signature patterns as kind of just like a background something to give it some depth can help to communicate the brand in a way that you don't need to put your logo all over everything, which is like one of my pet peeves about branding and digital marketing. It's just like overuse of the logo, right? You're going for the brand. Imagine, again, if we're going to use the kitchen analogy, if you had an Italian restaurant and every single dish had tomato in it, even though that's a signature flavor of Italian cuisine, sometimes people don't want tomato. Sometimes they want like a mushroom dish, right? A cream-based dish or a pesto. And so it's nice to have those other flavors at your disposal so that you're not necessarily having to give everyone tomatoes all the time. Your brand icons can also help to create visual variety beyond your existing ingredients and really beyond photography. I feel that a lot of clients struggle and get stuck with brand photos and get stuck with branding because they're relying on photos to carry so much and to communicate so much of what it is that they offer. Alternatively, if you invest in getting some brand icons made that are custom to your brand, they can help you explain your process, your services, or your offerings, or even help to gamify the experience of working with you. You can dictate different levels or different steps in something by using icons. It also just, again, contributes to building a little bit more personality and a little bit more intrigue in what it is that you have to offer. And that pretty much covers it. That is the whole chunk, part 2 of this Fit Boss Blueprint, building your brand empire presentation that was about solidifying your brand aesthetics. Definitely follow along on YouTube. If you happen to just catch this on a podcast, go back, rewatch the video. I think it'll be helpful to you. But it should give you an idea of how you can build and grow upon your brand in a way that's going to be not only useful for connecting to your audience, but really last you a while and give you the consistency that most often people who are struggling with branding are lacking, is the consistency in the level of professionalism. So those would be kind of your non-negotiables, brand visuals, how to solidify them into a system that works. Explained. Thank you so much for listening to part 2. And we're going to come back at you with part 3 on the next solo episode. And we'll catch you guys later. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.